I feel like I look very dramatic right now because I got a haircut, and you know when they blow it out and they're just like, ooh, drama, 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 drama. Don't think I take myself that seriously, okay?
It's just a haircut.
By the way, you should get your haircuts on the waxing moons if you're trying to get thick, luscious, long hair, because things are coming into fulfillment. Okay, I should probably get to the video, right? Hello, my loves. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I'm Leeor Alexandra. Welcome to the B community. On this channel, we talk about the law of attraction, spirituality, self-development, and how to break out of the matrix into the larger matrix, into the more beautiful matrix. So I've been wanting to do this video for a long time. I can't decide what I'm going to name it still as of this very moment as I'm recording it, because am I giving you 5 shows that reveal the matrix, or, you know, the truth of our planet, or are these 5 shows that expand our consciousness? Basically, what I want to deliver is these shows are shows that have to disclose certain types of information about the matrix. So maybe 5 shows that reveal disclosure, 5 shows that disclose the truth about the matrix. I like that one. Not a bad one at all. So I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I wanted to make sure that I had at least 1 or 2 lesser known shows so that I could completely blow your mind. Forgive me if I have not fulfilled that and you know all these shows, but we're going to talk about them anyways. So all these shows have completely different storylines, but each one reveals a different aspect of reality and how reality is really stranger than fiction. In my own lived experience, that's really been what I've discovered. Life is not what we're told it is. Reality is not only what we see. There are different layers and dimensions and worlds, and we have abilities beyond our knowledge and beyond our understanding. And some of these shows reveal that. So let's entertain for a moment that I'm not crazy. I know, hard, but let's just try. Just humor me for a second. Let's just say that I'm just a regular person who may have experienced the irregular part of life. I've had mystical experiences that are echoed in really probably each one of these shows, and so have millions, if not billions, of people around the world. This isn't rare. And these shows, for a lot of people, will feel like a remembrance more than a disclosure. It's more of like, oh, remember this? And I think that's really cool. The thing about television and entertainment in Hollywood is that it takes these facts and then it mixes them with a lot of fiction, and then that pushes it to the fiction corner of our mind, and that's how we're programmed to really believe that the magical stuff isn't real. But our subconscious mind at the same time is absorbing everything that we're consuming, and so there is some sort of an agenda that's being pushed by what we're watching. There's a narrative that we're being fed, because you must understand that whatever you watch, not necessarily actively watching like you're doing here on YouTube does fall under a different sort of media consumption for sure, but television and movies, broadcasting, media, these are all things that are broadcasting certain messages to the collective unconscious, especially when they're really big things like Marvel movies or the nightly news, or really popular shows like The Handmaid's Tale. I think it's called Handmaid's Tale. These are things that are encoded with certain frequencies that do have an agenda to push. Okay, so consider that while you watch TV. And while you watch all these things too. So I have learned through my studies, not necessarily through firsthand experience, I want to disclose that, but through other channelers and other sources of mystical information, that our universe is run by certain rules. And one of these rules is that everything that these elites or people in charge do to us must be done in plain sight. It must be put right in our faces. It can't be a secret. It's kind of like making us agree to the terms and conditions before entering a website or using an app. Or if you live in the US, a lot of the websites will have a cookie pop up, and it'll say, you know, we take your cookies, whatever, we take your data, browsing history, Do you want to keep going onto the site, yes or no? Or do you want to take a couple extra steps and get out of your data being harvested? Most people just want to get to the point, like I'm sure you're waiting for me to get to the point, and they just do consent. I consent to all the cookie settings, right? I consent to the terms and conditions. So everything is put right in our face, and we're not, yes, we're subverted and manipulated to agree to these things, but it is very important that we all understand that we are essentially agreeing to these things, because the real energy harvesting that happens from these elites and all this occult forces, the real magic is when they convince us to agree and to consent. It's not stealing. It's not taking it from you violently. It's not ravaging you. It is getting you to agree. Okay? So Hollywood is a system that was put in place to do just that. It gets us to agree with certain things in reality. It's a lot, I know. We'll talk more about that another day. So I'm not saying that these shows are documentaries of any sort. Like I was saying, I believe that entertainment, Hollywood, all these different things kind of lulls you into this trance-like state, and then through theatrics and sleights of hand, that's when it slips in the true, genuine message. So I'm not saying that literally there are literal timekeepers keeping us stuck and enslaved in this specific timeline, but I am telling you, and I am insinuating, that there is more to life than we can possibly conceptualize with our 5-dimensional senses right now, as we are in this state of consciousness, in this waking and aware state. Okay? We don't know until we know. Kind of like the show Loki shows us, which is on my list. So without any more weird psychobabble, let me get into the 5 shows that will expand your consciousness and reveal and disclose certain things about how reality is stranger than fiction. By the way, I don't know if I'm doing this right. This is the first time I've done anything really like this. My goal is to not spoil anything, and so I ask you to not spoil anything in the comments as well. I don't know if maybe what you guys actually would have wanted is something where I really discuss what happens on the show. Maybe I'll do that as a part 2. First, I want you to kind of have your mind blown by the show if you haven't yet. So let's get into it. Number 1, the first show that I want to mention is Undone. Undone, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. It's this uniquely animated show that I've watched the entire season probably 2 or 3 times at this point. This show blew my mind and triggered some existential OCD. However, it also felt like home. It felt like validation, like, oh, I'm not the only one that goes through this ideation and thinking whether, having my entire worldview shifted from my awakening, from my spiritual awakening, and then not knowing if I'm insane or not. And that's really what this show touches on. It's going to feel eerily familiar to anybody who's gone through a spiritual awakening or is going through one right now. For some, it might even trigger a spiritual awakening, which is interesting. So the main character basically goes through this awakening experience and, dimension jumping and timeline shifting and all this stuff after a really traumatic event. However, she has no one to guide her really, except for, you'll see, she does have some sort of guide to validate her experiences, but the awakening begins to feel like a state of psychosis. And what is a running theme through many of these shows is that you're not sure whether this person is really experiencing what they're experiencing or whether they've succumbed to a mental illness. And I think that is very familiar to anybody who's gone through an awakening. There are moments where you're going to feel absolutely insane. And if you're not questioning yourself whether you're insane, you're probably pretty far down the rabbit hole, and we'll see you on the other side. The show also deals with different timelines, in between states, the afterlife, the fluidity of time, and a lot about that fear of falling prey to psychosis during a spiritual awakening. But really, ultimately, what is real? We have no tangible way of measuring what is real and what's not, because all of reality is subjective. People might tell you, well, this is real because we can all see it at the same time, but you have no way, none of us have any way to verify that somebody else is seeing exactly the same thing that we're seeing. Yeah, reality is subjective. So there are many nuggets of disclosure in this show. One of my favorite ones is when Alma asks her father, Jacob, is this a dream? And he responds, no, well, partly, because, well, isn't that the case? Isn't that just so true? I think it's also interesting to note that the main character, Alma, is 28 when her life is turned upside down, which is a very appropriate age for that sort of thing to happen, because that is around the time when we enter our Saturn return year. If you don't know about that, I'll link a video below to expand your knowing on that. The second show I want to talk about is Utopia. This is also found on Amazon Prime. It was not renewed for another season, and once you watch it, you'll know why. Utopia was hated by the media. It came out right at the height of the 2020 conspiracy theories, and it kind of felt like a fever dream because it was so eerily, like, accurate, kind of feels like all the conspiracy theories that everybody was researching, and I say conspiracy theories for lack of a better term. I'm sure that some of them had truth to them and some of them had zero truth to them, but you know, those ones that you were researching with your family and whoever you're quarantining with in the beginning of the pandemic, it's gonna feel like that, okay? The show is really about a viral infection that's sweeping the world and the implications of what comes with that. Like, who's behind this? Is this natural? What do we do? What's real and what's not real? Again, that kind of like blur between who's crazy, really. Now, I want you to please watch the show if you haven't already and come back and tell me who the villain is modeled after. I don't think it's too much of a spoil. It's not a spoiler because it's just a theory, right? Comment it below if you've already seen who the villain is. Maybe switch the first letter of each of the names, okay? So that YouTube doesn't flag me down. Thanks. So Utopia, as I was saying, can be watched on Amazon Prime. It's one of those shows that wasn't renewed like the OA, which we'll talk about in a second, in my opinion, because it potentially had too much truth to it. It was not subtle enough, and it potentially was waking too many people up. I do need to give a trigger warning for this one. This one is extremely, extremely violent, and the first few episodes I couldn't watch alone, and I had to cover my eyes most of the time. If you're as sensitive as I am, you know, it's up to you if you want to watch something like this. It's pretty graphic, but the storyline for me was so good that it was worth it. So what I would do is I would watch it with a friend, and always in the daytime, so that's not the last thing that I go to bed thinking about, right? So the subconscious mind doesn't take it deeper and deeper. Third show that I want to talk about is, of course, the OA. No good show about breaking the matrix and disclosure would be complete. No real list would be complete without the OA. So if you're a fan of the OA and you're watching it while it was being released freshly on Netflix, you're probably like me, and you probably thought that its cancellation was just part of the lore of the story, right? That it was just, they're just tricking us. It's just part of the storyline. Well, it's about 3 years later, and it doesn't seem to be making a comeback anytime soon, which is so unfortunate because, wow, what a storyline and what an exquisitely well done show. This show has so much symbolism in it. It has symbolism from Greek mythology, from the Bible, from it just across the board, just so encoded with so much good stuff. The story itself, you know, touches on parallel lives and reincarnation, dimension hopping, and again, what's real and what's not. Again, that theme of psychosis or spiritual awakening. Who's the crazy person? Who's right and who's wrong? It also kind of shows us that everything is connected and that we have these groups of souls that we travel with from time to time, and we play different roles together in these different timelines. At the end of the last season, the show broke the fourth wall in a way that gave me, honestly, an ayahuasca flashback. If anyone is curious about what ayahuasca feels like to me, it's that. It's just like that. You're living your life one way, and then you realize all along it has been this entirely other thing that you could not see, and then now that you see it, you can't unsee it. So imagine, I heard this story somewhere, I don't remember where, but imagine that you're staring at a wall. You're sitting on a couch and you're staring at a wall. And you're staring at the wall for so long that suddenly you realize that it's not the wall and it's really the floor. It's like your entire life you thought it was the wall, but now you realize it's the floor. And it's like you wake up to this whole entirely different life. And I don't know if that kind of symbolism is too convoluted, if you haven't experienced this kind of other reality kind of thing, but I'm trying to explain. Maybe there's another better way to explain it. It's like walking in
a dark room.
Okay, I'm gonna stop trying to explain it because it's something that has to be felt, and the constraints of language are so limiting that it's really hard to transmit it, but maybe you feel me. So the OA, yes. So one of the show's previous writers wrote that the show was not seen as profitable because rather than telling us what to believe in, the OA gave us an invitation to seek the truth ourselves and have faith in things we cannot yet see, and to not be tricked and seduced by surfaces. Oh my God, that is the feeling of awakening to a new reality embodied. So yeah, I highly recommend watching the OA if you haven't already. That's also kind of like a fever dream, but it's gonna feel familiar. It's gonna feel like, oh right, I knew about this. The fourth show that I want to talk about is Loki. Loki is, somebody recommended this to me on Twitter, and I'm so grateful because it's so good. I enjoyed it more than I expected to. It's on Disney Plus. It's one of the Marvel Universe spin-offs. And in this show, Loki, the god of mischief, basically leaves ordinary time and space and has a cosmic adventure outside of time throughout different timelines. The show talks about alternate timelines, the fluidity of time and space, end of the world scenarios. But what I found the most enlightening and the most thought-provoking of the whole thing is right in the beginning. So this isn't a spoiler because it's literally the first episode and it's what the whole show is about. But it's like Loki is this demigod, right? And he thinks he is one of the strongest beings in the universe. He's a god. Nobody could pull one over on him because he's the be-all, end-all of everything, right? But he finds out that that's not the case and that there's somebody else pulling the strings. So it's kind of like that concept that I spoke with Indy the Alchemist on my podcast, if you've seen that, how we spoke about how there's a matrix within a matrix. And that was that was the disclosure that I picked up from Loki. It's like, oh, you think this is the matrix? No, this is the matrix. This out here is the matrix. And who knows what's outside of that matrix, right? So we don't have access to the truth. I personally think from my spiritual journey that there is always the access to the truth, which is direct conversation with God. Your direct line to God is always going to get through all the murkiness and haziness of all these other matrices. I am not of the belief that we're stuck here. I think that that's a belief system in itself, and that we can all transcend and return to the unconditional love of God and get out of this soul-sucking matrix once it's time for us to do that. That was a complete tangent. I'm sorry. What was I talking about? So yeah, it's that realization that Loki had that was like, oh my God, I thought this was all there is, but there's this whole other thing. And tell me if this, when you watch it, tell me if you felt this, but something felt nostalgic about it. It was like oh right, I forgot about this kind of thing. So last one that I want to talk about for this video is, and let me know if you guys want more of these, Behind Her Eyes. This is, I think, on Netflix as well. This is a darker show. It's a psychological thriller, and it exposes some esoteric spiritual practices that can be done, that are done, but I can't tell you about them because that would be a spoiler. It would spoil the whole show. So I can't really talk much about this one. Let me just say that Robert Monroe has explored this practice and was able to do something very similar for many years. It's a really, I think, a really well done and well written show. And I like that it really does bring esotericism into the exoteric, right? It makes it more mainstream kind of. And if anything, I tend to distrust the narrative of these shows, but I also believe that good can come from us becoming more comfortable with the unknown and with these different practices and what humanity is capable of, because human excellency and transcendence is a possibility. It's just that we've forgotten. We're in a deep sleep. We're in a deep sleep state still. So many of us are still not aware of our abilities and how grand and majestic we are, especially when we live in connection with God and with a deep self, with that higher aspect version of ourselves. Again, tangents all day today. Basically, those are the 5 shows that I think that you should watch if you're, having a weekend in and Saturday night in. If you've seen any of these, I would love some suggestions for shows and movies as well in the comments. Hi guys, Leeor here. A few hours later, a few hours wiser, and I'm sitting here with my files, and I realized that my camera died before I did my sign off. So here we are now. I'm about to have some ramen and go to bed, but I did have to record this. So I love you. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if there's any shows or movies that you recommend. I'll do more of these if you like this kind of video where it's like top 5 this or that. Let me know. It really helps when you comment, and it really helps when you give the video a thumbs up, because then I know what kind of content you want more of. I love you. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I have to do this with one hand. Keep your vibrations way, way, way up.